Welcome back to the Untold Stories, exclusive before Start the Story Now. Subscribe to the channel and comment down where you're from and what time it is for you right now. Now, turn off the lights, settle in, and let the darkness speak. There are towns the map remembers and towns it tries to forget. Greatich, Missouri, in the winter of 1906, belonged firmly to the latter. The Mississippi did not simply freeze that year, it hardened into something like glass, black and rippled at the edges, as if the river had been caught. Mid-breath. Farm animals refused to cross the shallows. Fishermen claimed their lines wouldn't sink, as if something beneath the ice was pushing them away. And it was on one of those nights when the moon refused to rise, and even the dogs would not howl that the people of Greatich buried a boy named Elias Mercer. But death, in this town, was never the end of the story. It was simply the beginning of the part no one wanted to tell. Tonight, we turn the pages of that unspoken history, and we begin with the place itself, a town built on silt, secrets, and soil that never seemed to stay still. Greatich lay at the bottom of a shallow valley carved by centuries of storms rolling off the river. Winters clung to it longer than anywhere else in the county. Fog would pour in at dusk and stay until near noon, thick enough to settle inside houses through open windows and thin floorboards. Air always tasted faintly of rust and wet bark. Wind dragged the sound of the river like a chain. People said it was a bad place to start a life, and an even worse place to end one. The town's single main road, more mud than dirt, stretched from the broken ferry dock to St. Lyle's Chapel, the only building with a bell that still worked. Behind the chapel sat a cemetery fenced in by rust-eaten iron, the kind that sang when the wind slid past it. No one in Greatich liked to walk through it, especially not in winter. Elias Mercer, the boy at the center of this tale, was 12 that winter. Small for his age, dark-haired, with eyes too large for his thin face. He'd lost his mother the winter before, a death that seemed to freeze something inside him. His father, Jonas Mercer, worked the river ferry at night, pulling travelers and goods across the black water for $1 a trip. People said Jonas had a quiet sadness that clung to him like smoke, a man who kept his grief folded neatly inside, where it festered. Elias had inherited that quiet, but something else, too, something that made even older folks uneasy. He listened more than he spoke, always watching the river with a strange, hungry interest. Then there was Dr. Thaddeus Wren, the only formally educated man for 40 miles. Wren was practical, humorless, and deeply tired. He kept 2 ledgers. One was for the town births, deaths, fevers, and broken bones. The other was written for no one but himself. In it, he recorded things he did not wish to say aloud. We'll return to that ledger soon enough. Marvin Kipp, caretaker of the cemetery, was a thin man with a back bent like a question mark. No one knew his age. He might have been 50, he might have been 80. He muttered to the ground when he walked, as though apologizing for stepping on it. Kids said he talked to the dead. Adults suspected he drank to forget them. In the winter of 1906, he quit drinking entirely. No one asked why. Deep down, they already knew. It began with footprints, not the kind you find after a child runs across fresh snow. These were strange bare footprints, as if made by someone who didn't feel the cold. They started appearing in the early days of December, scattered along fences, beside barns, sometimes circling empty space in the middle of fields. But when the men of the town gathered to follow one long set of tracks, they discovered something disturbing. The footprints ended precisely where the river began, as if the walker had stepped directly onto the frozen Mississippi and continued across it. As if the ice welcomed them. That was the first omen. But not the last. Elias Mercer had always been a light sleeper, his father said. But after the first snowfall of 1906, the boy began waking repeatedly during the night, sometimes screaming, sometimes whispering. Sometimes walking. In the doctor's official ledger, the one he shared, he wrote only, "EM exhibits signs of severe grief. Recommend rest." But in his hidden ledger, the one meant for no other eyes, he wrote something else entirely. Night walking grows worse, claims voices whisper beneath the ice, says his mother calls into the water. The doctor told no one. Not yet. And so the nights worsened. Jonas Mercer, exhausted from ferry shifts, often found his son standing at the foot of his bed, staring toward the window as though listening. When asked what he heard, the boy always answered the same way: "The river is talking again." Those were not words a father wished to hear. The people of Greatitch treated the Mississippi with a combination of reverence and fear. Boats had gone missing there, not sunk, not overturned, simply gone. Animals refused to drink from certain parts of the shoreline, skirting them in wide arcs. Local legend said there was a pull beneath the water, not a current, not a whirlpool, but something deeper, something that turned under the ice like a sleeper, dreaming. Old women whispered that if the river knew your name, it would never forget it, and Elias had spent too much time near the banks, even in the cold, especially after his mother died, especially after he claimed he heard her voice drifting from beneath the frozen surface. In the days leading up to his disappearance, Elias changed. Children noticed it first. They said his eyes looked darker. "He doesn't blink as much," one girl whispered. "He stands like he's listening to something we can't hear," said another. Adults blamed grief. Adults blame grief for many things that aren't grief at all. But there were stranger details. Elias stopped wearing shoes. No matter how often his father shouted, pleaded, or threatened, the boy walked barefoot in the snow, and he never once shivered. He ate less and less. Some said he wasn't hungry. Others said the river fed him. He avoided firelight, lanterns, hearths. He'd turn his face away from the glow, flinching as if it hurt his eyes. He sleepwalked outside. More than once, neighbors claimed they saw a small figure drifting down the main road in the fog, feet bare, nightshirt dragging in the snow. When they called out to him, he did not answer. He only turned his head too slowly and stared at them with an expression that made grown men swallow hard. Something was wrong with the boy, but no one wanted to admit how wrong. It was January 3rd, a Wednesday, and the coldest night of the winter so far. Jonas Mercer came home from the ferry just before dawn. His hands were numb. The lantern flame barely stayed lit. He opened the cabin door and froze. The back door was wide open. Snow had blown into the kitchen, forming a thin drift against the table legs. The boy's boots sat untouched by the door, and Elias's bed narrow, sagging, was empty. Still warm. Jonas followed the trail of tiny bare footprints behind the house, across the field, down toward the river. They stopped at the water's edge, or rather where the water should have been. The ice there was shattered in a perfect circle, as though something had punched up from beneath. Elias's wool cap lay beside the opening, stiff with frost, and there, etched faintly in the snow as the wind, he heard a sound beneath the snow, a faint, rhythmic scraping. Not the sound of settling soil, not a burrowing animal, but the sound of fingernails dragging along wood. Long, slow, steady. As though someone beneath the ground was trying not to panic. He dropped his broom and backed away, whispering a prayer he hadn't used in 20 years. Later, when the sheriff questioned him, Kip's words trembled like old branches. It weren't the wind, and it weren't no creature. It was a child, trying to get out. The sheriff told him grief was making them hear things, but the caretaker knew better. Everyone in Greatitch did. They just didn't want to admit what they feared. The boy had not stayed dead. In Greatitch, the dead were meant to stay where they were buried, silent, still, unmoving beneath the frozen earth. But 5 days after Elias Mercer's funeral, the soil over his grave began to Change. Not collapse, not thaw, but sink as if something beneath the earth was shifting, pulling, clawing, begging. The snow around his headstone had melted in a perfect ring, and the townsfolk found bare footprints in the slush, small, childlike prints circling the grave once, twice, 3 times. No one saw anyone approach the cemetery. No one heard the gate open. Yet the footprints existed, and not a single one of them led toward the grave. Only away from it. That was when the disturbance truly began, when the cold quiet of Greatich broke open, letting something older, hungrier, and uninvited step through. Caretaker Marvin Kipp had tended those grounds for nearly 20 years. He'd buried dozens of townsfolk infants, old women, river workers crushed beneath cargo crates. He'd heard sobbing, arguments, confessions whispered into dirt. Nothing frightened him. But the 5th morning after Elias's burial, the caretaker stepped out of his small shed with a shovel in hand and stopped cold. Elias's grave no longer rose gently like the others. It dipped inward, as if the coffin had collapsed or the earth had swallowed something. Kipp knelt beside it. Snow crunched under his knees. The depression was too deep, far deeper than settling soil. He leaned closer, held his breath, and then he heard it. Scratching, not frantic, not desperate, slow, steady, measured, a dragging sound, like a fingernail tracing the underside of a wooden lid. Kipp stumbled back so quickly he fell into the snow. He didn't bother to stand. He simply crawled backward until his spine hit a headstone. That same night he told the sheriff, "I heard him down there. I swear by God, in every grave I dug. The boy's scratching to get out." Sheriff Alcott did not call him mad. He simply told him to stop talking, which frightened Kipp far more than if the sheriff had laughed. 3 nights later, the knocking began. Not on doors, but on windows. It started at the Hargreaves farmhouse. Mrs. Hargreaves woke just after midnight to a gentle tapping on the glass beside her bed. Tap, tap, tap. She thought it was a branch, a loose shutter, until she opened her eyes. A small, wet handprint marked the center of the window, a perfect print. Fingers splayed, water sliding down the glass. Mrs. Hargreaves whispered her husband's name, voice tight with dread. But before he woke, something outside the window moved. A shadow, small, thin. It shifted its weight. Turned its head and pressed its face against the pane. She saw eyes, dark, too dark, and a mouth slightly open, as if whispering words through the glass. Mrs. Hargreaves screamed so loud she woke half the house. Her husband ran out with a rifle, but by the time he rounded the corner, the prints in the snow led toward the orchard and simply stopped halfway down the hill. As though the small figure had either vanished or sunk, Jonas Mercer had not slept since the funeral. He spent every night at his kitchen table with a lantern lit, staring at the door, drinking nothing, speaking to no one. Waiting for something he could not name. Neighbors whispered that grief had hollowed him out, but something else lived in those hollow spaces now, something brittle and expectant. On the 6th night after Elias's burial, Jonas heard footsteps outside the cabin, small ones. Soft ones, feet dragging slightly through the snow. He tightened his grip on the lantern. His breath trembled. The footsteps circled the house once, then twice, then stopped just outside the back door. Jonas moved closer. Every board in the cabin creaked under his weight. He whispered, "Elias?" A silence deep enough to swallow itself pressed against the walls. Then came it, a single knock. Soft, fragile, not on the door, but on the bottom of it. As if the knocker was too small to reach the center. Jonas sank to his knees. He didn't open the door. He didn't dare. The knock came again. Louder. And then a small voice, wet and cold as river ice, whispered through the wood, "Papa, it's warm in there." Jonas pressed his fist to his mouth to keep from crying out. When he finally opened the door at sunrise, the only trace left was a faint circle of melted frost, exactly where a child's breath might have touched the wood. Sheriff Alcott was a man who did not believe in ghosts, but he did believe in evidence. And when 3 more houses reported window tapping, always small hands, always wet, he went to the person he trusted least but needed most. Dr. Thaddeus Wren. The doctor let him in reluctantly, gesturing to a chair crowded with medical pamphlets. Sheriff Alcott didn't sit. He said only, "Tell me what you wrote about the boy. Not the ledger you show the town, the real one." The doctor stiffened. Sweat beaded his forehead despite the cold. After a long silent moment, one that felt like something in the room was listening, Wren walked to a locked drawer, opened it, and removed a small leather-bound book. The cover was worn, the page just gone. The men stood in silence, breath turning to mist. Finally, one whispered. He sank. No one answered, but none of them stepped forward to test the snow. The Mississippi took on a strange beauty that winter. Beneath the ice, shadows moved, not the ordinary shifting of currents. Something slower, more deliberate. Children claimed to hear voices from its edge, low murmurs. Rising through the cracks, one boy swore he heard, "Come down. Come down, it's colder here." Adults scolded him, but no one refuted him with conviction. Rumors swelled like river fog that the dead boy was walking. The river had claimed him. He wanted company. But the truth was more terrible. Some people heard a second voice under the ice. A woman's voice, soft, sad, calling a single name, Elias. Jonas Mercer heard it most of all. On the 8th night, Jonas could no longer bear the knocking, the tapping at windows, the small footprints circling his porch, the faint, cold voice whispering, "Papa, you left me in the dark." He lit a lantern, wrapped a scarf around his face, and walked toward the cemetery. Neighbors saw him go. None dared follow. He climbed the hill slowly, lantern flickering. Wind howled between the tombstones. He stopped at his son's grave, kneeling. He pressed a hand to the earth. Then he whispered, "I'm here now." "Son." The lantern went out. No one saw Jonas Mercer again. Not in daylight. Not in shadow. Not in the river. But the next morning, Marvin Kipp found footprints, 2 sets leading between the gravestones. One small. One larger. They ended at the boy's grave, but the grave remained undisturbed and empty. The townsfolk had lived with hunger. With storms, with broken ferries and failed crops, but they could not live with whispers in their homes, with footsteps in their hallways. With cold breaths on their windows. Parents kept their children indoors. Men quit night shifts. The chapel bell was rung every hour. Though no one attended service, everyone felt it. Something in Greatedge had slipped loose. Something that walked between the houses. Something that climbed the cemetery hill at night. Something that did not belong to the living or the dead. Something wearing the face of a drowned child, and the town knew. River had returned Elias Mercer, but not his soul. By the 10th night, Greatedge no longer slept. Doors stayed barred. Lanterns burned until their oil turned black. People spoke in whispers, afraid their words might draw attention from something listening just outside their walls. The sheriff tried to keep order, but order was impossible when the living feared the footsteps of the dead. And the dead, or what were their shape, walked freely. Sheriff Alcott believed the truth could stop panic. He thought knowledge would shield the town from madness, but the truth, when it finally surfaced, was not a shield. It was a blade. Sharp. Cold. And aimed directly at the heart of Greatedge. It began with the doctor's second ledger and ended with a revelation older than the town itself. Sheriff Alcott returned to Dr. Wren's home on a night when the wind screamed loud enough to mask his knocking. The angels. Doctor opened the door reluctantly, shadows under his eyes so deep they looked painted on. The sheriff pushed past him, lantern raised. "Sit," Alcott ordered quietly. They sat at the kitchen table, a narrow slab of worn wood scarred by old knife marks. The Sheriff placed the forbidden ledger on the table. "Read it," he said. Dr. Wren hesitated. "Out loud," the doctor swallowed. "Open to the earliest page concerning Elias Mercer." And began. "EM age 12. Persistent coldness in extremities. Claims frost does not bother him. Avoids FIRLIG. Prefers open air even in snow." The sheriff tapped the page. "When was this?" "October," Wren said. "Long before the river froze." He turned to the next entry. Boy states he hears whispers from the river. Female voice. "Mama calling." "From under the ice," he says. The sheriff frowned. "His mother drowned, didn't she?" Wren shook his head slowly. "No, she fell through thin ice, yes. But her body was never found." The sheriff's lantern hissed softly, throwing shifting shadows on the walls. "Never found." Alcott repeated. Wren nodded. "She vanished. The river took her under." A silence heavy as a coffin lid settled over the room. "And the boy," Wren continued softly, "claimed she wasn't dead. Only cold, sleeping below." The next entries grew darker. Pupils dilate fully in low light. Even lantern flame causes discomfort. Skin cold to touch. No fever. No natural circulation pattern. Child claims he belongs to the cold now. Sheriff Alcott clenched his jaw. What in God's name does that mean? But the doctor wasn't finished. He turned to a page half crumpled from being closed. Too quickly. EM seen standing by river at night. Not moving. Not blinking. When touched. He did not react for several seconds. Boy tells me, the water doesn't hurt when you let it in. Fear we are not dealing with illness. Something else is taking hold. The sheriff leaned back. Breath unsteady. Then came the final entry. The one written the night Elias died. The ink was smeared as if written with shaking hands. He said he hears her beneath the ice, that she wants him home. Child's eyes turned black in low candlelight. Entire iris swallowed. He is slipping from our world, becoming something. In most places the cold silences water. But not in Great Ditch. Here. The Mississippi did not freeze solid. It breathed beneath the ice slow. Heavy breaths that moved through the frozen surface like something alive. People claimed to see shapes under the surface. Not fish. Not logs. Shapes that moved against the current. Shapes that hovered. Shapes that waited. And now the sheriff understood. Elias had not drowned. He had joined something that remembered. Something that wanted more. Armed with the ledger and the pastor's journal, Sheriff Alcott had two choices. Tell the town and cause a panic that would destroy it. Keep the truth close and try to stop the dead boy. Alone. He chose neither. He went to the Mercer cabin. Needed to search it to see what the father had left behind. But when he reached the house, the door was hanging open. Snow drifted inside. The sheriff stepped in cautiously, lantern raised. "Jonas?" he called. His voice echoed off the empty walls. Something crunched beneath his boot. He lowered the lantern. Footprints. Small ones, trailing through the cabin, circling rooms, brushing past walls. Then stopping at the fireplace. In front of it lay a wet imprint of a child kneeling as if begging for heat. But the fire was dead, the sheriff realized. Jonas's lantern was missing. That meant Jonas had taken it with him. To the cemetery. To join his son, if he joined him willingly or unwillingly. The sheriff refused to ask. As the sheriff left the Mercer home, the wind died, and behind him came the familiar sound. Tap. 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 The knocking. Slow. Wet. Rhythmic. It came from every direction. Windows. Barn doors. Shutters. Pantry, cellars, even the chapel gates. Dozens of small knocks. As if every child claimed by the river had returned at once. The sheriff spun, lantern shaking. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, more desperate. Tap dash tap dash tap dash tap. Then a voice, a single voice, drifting cold on the wind. Sheriff. The hair rose on the back of his neck. Sheriff, come down. It's warmer. Beneath. Asterisk asterisk. The sheriff backed away, heart hammering. But the voice followed. You can't keep us out. We know the warmth inside your bones. You hear us, don't you? Asterisk asterisk. The lantern flickered, nearly died, and then the sheriff stumbled, running blindly toward the chapel, the only place left with walls thick enough to feel safe. He slammed the doors behind him. The knocking continued outside. Soft. Constant, everywhere. He pressed his back to the door and closed his eyes. The river had returned the dead, and they were no longer alone. No one in Greatwich spoke above a whisper by the second week of January. Not the old men, not the children, not even the pastor in his candlelit chapel. Words carried in strange ways that winter, if you spoke too loudly near a window. The river answered back. If you shouted at the barn to scare off coyotes, something else got scared. Or angry. But the worst of it was this. People had begun to hear their names in the dark. Not yelled. Not called. Just whispered. Soft as a child learning to speak. Cold as ice cracking in the distance. And always in a voice that should have belonged to Elias Mercer, but sometimes didn't. Some said it was one voice. Others said it was many. Either way, Greatwich was listening, and the dead were speaking. It happened on a Tuesday, the coldest night yet. Sheriff Alka had just sealed himself inside the chapel with the pastor, who insisted the storm would pass, but a storm was not what came. It began with a single gust, a sigh of air colder than anything the town had felt before, a wind so sharp it could have cut through bone. It blew across the streets. Through cracks in doorframes. Around chimneys, past lanterns. And the flames died, all of them. Every lantern. Every hearth. Every candle snuffed out at once, as if pinched by an invisible hand. Darkness sealed the town whole. A stillness followed, thick, pressing, absolute. Then came the footsteps. Not human ones. Not animal. Small. Bare. Dragging slightly, as if wet feet were being lifted through snow that resisted everything except them. They came from every direction. From the river. From the cemetery. From alleyways. From cellars. Moving toward the houses, the chapel, the barns, toward warmth that no longer existed. 1. The Hargreaves family. Mrs. Hargreaves had been praying nonstop since the night. She saw that thin figure at her bedroom window. But on the night the fires died, praying did not help. Her youngest, Clara, woke screaming. He's in my room, she cried. He's standing in the corner. Don't let him touch me. Mr. Hargreaves ran upstairs with an axe in hand. He found no one, but frost clung to the walls. The floorboards glistened wet. And a small handprint, dripping with river water, marked the corner of Clara's quilt. That same night, the Hargreaves packed what they could carry and fled the house. When neighbors asked where they'd go, Mr. Hargreaves said, anywhere but here. He lied. You cannot outrun a river that calls your name. Point 2. The Patterson sisters, the Patterson girls, twins, age 9, shared a small attic room overlooking the orchard. Their parents found them at sunrise sitting upright in their beds, smiling in a way children should never smile. Their voices spoke in unison. He talked to us. They would not say who he was, only that he felt cold and wanted us to come see the river. They slept with their eyes open the following night. The night after that, they refused to sleep at all. On the third night, they vanished. No footprints. No open doors. Just 2 small cloaks missing from their wall hooks, and a single message carved into the frost inside their bedroom window. 3. The widower Henry Pikeold. Henry Pike lived alone at the edge of town. He had lost his wife to pneumonia 2 winters earlier. Neighbors checked on him from time to time, fearing loneliness would break him. But when they visited on that fireless night, Henry was sitting in his chair, staring at his open front door. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't blinking. Just staring into the snow, where small footprints had gathered like seeds around the entrance. On the doorframe were 4 tiny scratches, perfectly straight, like fingers testing wood. Henry whispered. She stood there. My Mary. She asked why I hadn't joined her yet. But Mary Pike had been buried for 2 years, and her grave had never sunk. Until that night. Inside the chapel, the pastor leafed through old scriptures and journals. By candle stump, the only place where a flame still survived. Not warmth. Not comfort. Just light. Sheriff Olcott paced the altar floor, muttering, "We can't keep them out forever." The pastor shook his head. "They do not want in," he whispered. "They want down." The sheriff frowned. "Down?" "To the river." The pastor placed a trembling hand on an old journal. "There were winters like this before," he said. "Those taken by the ice always return. When the cold is deep enough. They return hungry. Lonely." "For what?" the sheriff asked, but the pastor did not answer. Instead, he murmured, "Our graveyard sits too close to the old riverbed, and the dead do not stay where we put them." That same night, the lanterns at the Mercer cabin, those that Jonas normally lit, were all extinguished. The sheriff approached with his own lantern, swaying violently from shaking hands. He pushed the door open. Inside, frost coated every surface. The table. The chairs, the bed frames, even the walls had grown thin, glistening sheets of ice like sap. And on the far side of the room, carved with nails into the wooden boards, he took the lantern. Wef Olod Weed. Sheriff Olcott nearly dropped his lantern. Something had taken Jonas Mercer, or something Jonas had gone to willingly. Either way, he had not gone alone. As whispers spread, the remaining townsfolk gathered in the small, sagging town hall. Half the windows were boarded. The rest were covered with blankets. Everyone spoke at once. "They're walking the streets. I heard my dead sister calling. My cellar door opened on its own. The footprints are around my barn. We can't stay." Sheriff Olcott slammed his fist onto the table. Quiet. Silence fell. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "We need to leave," one man finally said. "Take the children and run." "Run where?" Another snapped. "To the next town. The river touches them all." Sheriff Olcott shook his head slowly. "No one leaves until sunrise." A woman sobbed. One of the older men shouted, "Why? Why wait?" The sheriff hesitated. Then said the words none wanted to hear. "Jonas Mercer left in the dead of night. He didn't make it to the next house. If we run now, we'll be walking right into darkness." A hush settled like snow. The townsfolk knew he was right. Night belonged to the river. That night, while the townsfolk huddled in the hall, someone spotted a small figure standing across the road. Just beyond the LAMPL, IGHT. Still. Silent. Hands at his sides, head tilted. He wasn't walking. He wasn't knocking. He was waiting. Every person inside the hall went rigid. The figure took a single step forward. Snow moved out of his way, parting like ripples on a pond. The sheriff raised his lantern. The light flickered over the child's face. Not Elias. And yet it wore the same expression. The same darkness in its eyes, the same wetness on its cheeks. A little girl gasped, "That's Samuel White." Samuel had drowned 3 winters ago. His grave had sunk sometime during the night. The figure took another step. Children began to cry. Women prayed. Men cursed under their breath. Finally, the sheriff stepped forward and hissed, "You can't have them." The figure stopped. Slowly, unnaturally, its mouth opened, and in a voice that was both a whisper and a groan, it said, "We don't want them. We want you." Then it vanished, dropped straight down into the snow without a sound. As if the earth had swallowed it whole. The river's a deep crack echoed across the valley. The ice was splitting, not melting, not shifting, splitting in long, jagged lines that glowed faintly, like veins filled with moonlight. The townsfolk watched from the windows in horror as the river surface began to move. Like something beneath was stirring. Stretching. Waking. Children covered their ears. The sound of cracking ice became voices, layered, overlapping, rising. "Come down. It's warm here. We're waiting. We remember your names." The pastor began to weep. The sheriff whispered, "This isn't a haunting. This is a calling." Close to midnight, a scream erupted from the back of the hall. A woman pointed at the door with shaking hands. Footprints. Fresh. Dozens of them. Small. Bare. Wet. The sheriff ran to the entrance. The prints led directly up to the door, and then under it. Inside the hall. Inside with them. He spun around, lanterns sweeping the floor. More prints circling the room, moving between families, around the benches, past the walls. No one saw who made them, but everyone knew they were inside. The knocking returns. Tap. 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 Not from one direction. From all of them. Floorboards trembled under the knocks. Windows rattled. Ceiling beams groaned. It sounded like children knocking. Thousands of them. As if the river had returned every drowned soul from decades past. The sheriff shouted over the noise, "No one moves. No one opens a door." But it did not matter. The knocking wasn't asking for entry. It was searching. Counting. Calling. And then all the knocking stopped. At once. The silence was worse. A child screamed. People turned. The footprints now formed words arranged perfectly across the dust-covered floorboards, as if written by 100 invisible hands. The sheriff held his lantern close and read. "Brig hor I fa silent." "What light?" someone asked. But the sheriff knew. Jonas had taken his lantern when he went to the cemetery. A lantern full of warm oil, a flame the dead wanted, a flame the river remembered. The light Elias used to sleep beside when his mother was alive, the only warmth he'd known. The river wanted it back, all of it. Sheriff Alcott's voice was barely a whisper. "They don't want bodies. They don't want souls. They want warmth." The pastor nodded, tears streaming. "The cold claims the living when their warmth is weak, but it envies the warmth of the dead." The sheriff closed his eyes. "They won't stop until every lantern is out, every hearth cold, every living warmth buried under ice." Everyone in the hall understood. This was not a haunting that could be waited out. This was a hunger, an ancient one. And Greatitch was already inside its jaws. By the third week of January, Greatitch was no longer a town. It was an echo. Every home sat cold. Every chimney dead. Every lantern drained or shattered. The Mississippi no longer flowed. It pulsed a slow, shivering rhythm beneath the ice, like a heart beating under frost. And the dead, they had stopped knocking. Not because they were gone, because they were planning. The people of Greatitch would soon learn something far worse than fear. They would learn what it meant to be collected. The townsfolk had barricaded themselves inside the town hall. Boards nailed over windows, benches stacked against doors, lanterns lined along the walls. Though none held flame. In the center of the room, Pastor Ellery stood with a Bible in both hands. But he wasn't preaching. He was shaking. "We must pray," he whispered. But no one kneeled. Prayers had stopped working when the frost began forming inside. The hall crawling across the windows in slow tendrils like skeletal fingers. Sheriff Alcott stepped beside the pastor. "Prayers won't save us," he said quietly. "We need to think." The pastor shook his head. "You can't outthink the cold," he said. "Especially not this cold." His voice cracked. "It learned our names." Around midnight, the knocking returned. But not on wood, on bone. A sharp, Brittle tap-tap echoing through the hall as if coming from the beams inside the walls. Then the wind died. The town exhaled. Something enormous stirred beneath the river. Ice. The ground shivered beneath their feet. A low hum like a deep, distant choir resonated through the floorboards. Mrs. Keenan whispered, "That's not the river." No doubt at WASN single quotes T that it was everything the river had taken, calling in unison. A scream erupted at the back of the hall. People spun. Lanterns rattled. Children cried. A thin line of frost slid across the floor, snaking like a living serpent toward the center of the room. The boards cracked. Splintered. Sharp pops echoed as ice expanded through the wood. Sheriff Alcott drew his pistol. The pastor raised his Bible. The frost line widened. Then a hand small, pale, waterlogged broke through the floorboards. People shrieked. The hand grasped blindly, fingers twitching, nails blue and peeling. Another hand emerged beside it. Then another. Then two more. 5 children's hands pushed through the gaps, reaching for ankles, for skin, for warmth. The sheriff fired twice. Bullets tore through pale flesh, but the hands kept grasping, relentlessly, silently. A man swung an axe. The blade severed a wrist. The hand kept moving, crawling like a severed spider. People stumbled backward, screaming. The sheriff roared, "Get back! Get back!" But there was no back left, only corners too cold to hide in. The boards burst open wider. Something pulled itself up. Not Elias. Not Samuel. Not a single child, but many bodies. Overlapping. Faces merging. Hands clutching. A tangle of drowned souls rising as one. A mass of ice and memory. Someone fainted. Someone sobbed. The pastor whispered, "They're all here. Everyone the river ever took." The sheriff grabbed the nearest lantern, empty, and hurled it at the floor. Glass shattered. "Run!" he shouted. The stampede began. Families surged toward the side door. Men kicked the boards loose. Women shielded children with their coats. The sheriff stayed behind with the pastor, buying seconds with bullets that did nothing but echo. The child mass swayed, heads tilting, eyes black as oil under moonlight. A voice rose from them, not one voice, but hundreds layered atop one another. "Come down, bring light, we miss the warmth." The pastor clasped his cross. Sheriff Alcott whispered, "Go, I'll hold them." The pastor hesitated. Then knotted tears, freezing on his cheeks, and ran for the door. The sheriff faced the rising swarm of drowned children. He raised his pistol. He whispered, "Come on then." The pistol clicked. Empty. And the children surged outside. Families fled down the snow-choked road. Adults carried children. Children carried blankets. All of them carried nothing but fear. The cold air crackled like fire. The sky glowed faintly as if lit from beneath the earth. Instead of above. They headed toward the woods. Away from the river. Away from the cemetery. Away from the hall where the sheriff had made his stand. But the woods offered no comfort. Frost grew between the branches, knitting trees together like ribs. Footprints, hundreds of them, appeared in the snow ahead. Waiting. Watching. Blocking the path. The widow, Martha, screamed, "We're trapped." The pastor held up his Bible, though he knew it was useless. The footprints moved, not toward the townsfolk. Just into the trees. Slow. Inviting. Leading back toward the river. Every child in the group suddenly froze. Their eyes went unfocused. Their lips parted. One whispered, "They're calling us." The pastor shouted, "Cover their ears." Adults clamped hands over children's heads, but the whispers didn't enter through ears. They entered through memory. Through longing, through the cold. Children pulled free. Some laughed. Some simply drifted like sleepwalkers. The pastor yelled, "Don't let them go." But the children were already stepping off the path, walking in thin, perfect lines, following the footprints toward the river. The pastor chased after them, The others followed desperate. Frantic, slipping in snow and frost, they reached the riverbank breathless. The ice glowed blue-white, as if lit from within, and there, standing on the frozen surface, was a figure small straight still Elias. Mercer, his eyes black, his mouth slightly open, his wet nightshirt frozen stiff against his frame. Beside him stood dozens of other figures. Samuel White. Mary Pike, children the town had forgotten, children from winters decades old. Their shapes flickered like candle flames, their shadows stretched across the ice. They were waiting. Elias raised one hand. The river cracked in a long line, a perfect circle spread beneath the ice as if marking a grave. The children of Greatich stepped forward. Adults screamed. Pulled. Begged. Fought. But the river pulled harder. Wind lashed the valley with a roar. The frozen circle opened, and the first child fell through. People lunged, grabbed coats, sleeves, hair, but cold hands rose from beneath the ice. Grasping, dragging, eager, one by one, the children slipped through the opening. Silent, entranced, calm, as if going home. The pastor collapsed, sobbing. "Not again," he whispered. "Please, not again." But the river did not grant mercy. It granted reunion. The sheriff's Aritiuan behind them. The town hall door slammed open. Sheriff Alcott stumbled out bleeding from the forehead, breath ragged, coat torn as if clawed. But he was alive. Barely. He reached the riverbank in time to see the last of the children pulled into the opening. "No!" he roared. Elias turned his head slowly. As if recognizing him. As if waiting. The sheriff barreled forward, slipping on ice, pulling his knife. But the ice beneath him shattered. He plunged through. The water swallowed him whole. Adults screamed. Hands reached for him, but dark shapes beneath the surface moved faster. The sheriff was dragged downward. His lantern, still clutched in one hand, flickered once underwater. Glow. Warm. Defiant. Then it was gone. The opening close. The ice sealed. Silence returned. Greatich never recovered. The pastor left that spring. Mrs. Hargreaves couldn't speak again. Henry Pike was found wandering the fields barefoot, mud under his nails. The town shrank from 200 residents to less than 50 within a year. Rumors spread. The river was cursed. The ground was hungry. The dead walked. The cemetery was moved higher on the hill. But the old graves remained. Unmarked. Unblessed. Unresting. Some nights, travelers along the river claim they see a lantern glow beneath the ice. Moving slowly. As if carried by a man walking underwater. Some hear tapping on their boat hulls. Soft. Childlike. Some swear they hear whispers beneath the frozen surface. "Is it warm where you sleep? Come down. We remember your names." And when winter comes hard enough to freeze the Mississippi black, footprints appear in the snow along the riverbank. Small. Bare. Leading in no direction but out. On the coldest nights, when the sky hangs heavy and the moon refuses to rise, people who pass Greatich swear they see a small figure on the way. Ice. A boy, head tilted, nightshirt frozen stiff against his thin frame. He stands still. He waits, and sometimes only. Sometimes he lifts one hand. As if offering you a lantern. As if offering you a choice. As if asking, "Is it warm where you sleep?" And if you answer, even in a whisper, the river will know your name, just like it knew his. Elias Mercer, the boy buried twice, the boy who never stayed in the ground.